got a 1200 on my SATs, 580 in math, 620 in verbal. That's it. My mom insisted we pay the $13 via phone to hear the results as soon as they came out, and I remember sitting there, stunned in silence, unable to convey to my mother what the mechanical voice on the other line had just told me. Though it's a fairly decent score, I suddenly felt very impoverished in the intelligence department. I mean, here I was, the commotion of my past English teachers, fairly well off in math, and yet the girl from my advanced biology class who took the SATs with a hangover got a higher score than me. And doesn't that beat it all? Now, I'm sure at this point I could tell you how bad Einstein was at math, how Mozart was considered inept at the violin. I could go on about genius after genius that defies standardized tests and grades, but I'm not part of that category either. I have never composed anything more than gibberish on any instrument, and sitting about contemplating something as complicated as the theory of relativity sadly has never entered my mind. I have hardly proved myself genius at all. I mean, one time when I was little, I convinced my sister convinced me that pennies were worth more than quarters, and she kept up this charade throughout most of my young, naive life. Now, armed with my lifetime supply of pennies, I can only hear that voice saying 1200 over and over. It's like it's stamped on my forehead for everyone to see. 1200! Just another person who failed to meet their own expectations. Yet, now that I think about it, the SATs were never part of my standards. My potential was. All throughout my life, I have believed in my individual theory of potential energy. Just as the term in science refers to energy that has the possibility to do work, my potential energy possesses the ability to do or become something. For example, in the 4th grade, when I wanted more than anything to become a poet, there was no boundary between me and good old T.S. Eliot. Well, okay, his poems about cats were a little bit better, but to me, there were no limits, no boundaries. There I was, dwelling in the art of possibility, never looking down into the earth until 1200 gave me a hefty little shove off the cloud I was on. I guess it's a good thing I was never bound for the Ivy Leagues, but still, it stings to know it'll hinder my chances for scholarships. I know that there is more to me than this, more than GPA, class rank, SATs, but what? What am I to say? That I have measured out my life in coffee spoons? Should I go on about my creativity, my compassion, my love of wordplay? How about 4 years belaboring at the German language? I want to say, I am intelligent. I can't prove it, but somehow I am. Of course, that's rather egotistical of me, and I'm sure the readers of my applications would frown upon it. It is hard for me to prove what I have not yet proved to myself, and it is worse still to be cast aside as one incapable of proving it. So, how can I properly measure the little gray blobs inside my head for all to behold? Another bout at the SATs? Perhaps. But knowing me, the one who manages to poke herself in the eye due to lack of hand-eye coordination, 1200 may be all I ever get. I know that there is more to me than this. That I will amount to something, maybe not genius level or anywhere close, but something worthwhile. So go ahead, stamp me on the forehead with it. 1200. 580 in math, 620 in verbal. After all, the element of surprise is now in my favor.
Space, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the starship Enterprise, its 5-year mission, to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilization, and to boldly go where no man has gone before. These are the opening lines to what can be considered the classic TV show of the 1960s. This puts it in league with such shows as I Love Lucy, The Three Stooges, or Rod Serling's masterpiece, The Twilight Zone. In the end, however, Star Trek rises above all these, entertaining and inspiring generations throughout the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, well into today. Why? The reason is simple. Star Trek is more than fake characters on a fictional timeline. It's a look into the future of human potential. To put it simply, Star Trek is a scientist's dream come true. Matter, can be converted into energy, thrown through a data stream, and recompiled at the other end. Through a similar process, food and other materials can be replicated out of thin air. Only energy is required. This is based on a theory today that matter and energy are actually two directions along the same road. Even now, scientists are working on a warp drive, the very thing that humanity needs to escape our galaxy and seek out these new lives and new civilizations. Isaac Asimov's dream of the positronic brain has been realized. Everything that is just theory today has been built and is in practical use in the Star Trek universe. Star Trek is a host to a myriad of alien races, but the show's creator, Gene Roddenberry, wanted to infuse social commentary into his creation. So in every new species we encounter, we find a bit of ourselves. Take the Ferengi, for instance. They typify human greed, or capitalism, whatever you prefer. The whole point of their lives is to gain profit. In fact, they believe after they die, they need to bribe their way into heaven. The Klingons represent everything angry and warlike about humanity. They live and die by the sword, or the Batleth, as they call it. To quote Worf, son of Moog, "Today is a good day to die." The Bajorans represent religion, but it should be noted they become too zealous and are conquered by the Cardassians, who represent everything sly and evil about humanity. And finally we come to the Vulcans, everything calm, logical about the human psyche. This idea of finding ourselves in others is culminated in Gene Roddenberry's inclusion of IDIC, the Vulcan ideal of infinite diversity and infinite combinations. This was added to remind viewers that why Star Trek is a great science fiction masterpiece. One of its primary goals was to foster cross-cultural understanding. The Star Trek fans, or Trekkies as they're often called, are accused of living in a fantasy world and often remind that it's just a TV show. But the reason Trekkies prefer to live in this fictional future is simple, really. In this case, fiction is better than reality. The economics and politics of the 24th century, as presented in Star Trek, are far removed from those of today. Money has been virtually eliminated. None of the materials used to build the great ships you see on the show were bought or paid for. Starfleet officers receive no commission, simply free room and board. Earth has also been drastically changed. To quote the fictional commander Trip Tucker, "We've eliminated war, hunger, and poverty in less than 100 years, and that ain't no small potatoes." He's right. War hasn't been seen on the surface in centuries. In fact, all of Earth has been united under one president, who isn't even human. So who can blame Trekkies for wanting to live in this almost paradisical future? Yes, with all its original insight and vision, it's a shame that the 5-year mission spoken by Captain James T. Kirk only lasted 3 years. But Star Trek has rebounded. Now 5 series and 9 movies long, it's firmly embedded itself in our culture. It's become so embedded, in fact, I feel the only proper way to end this speech is with live long and prosper.
The State Fair is a favorite attraction for children. They're drawn to the rides, the games, and the prizes. A popular reward is a toy known as the Chinese handcuffs, an open-ended cylinder of woven paper. The delighted winner inserts his index fingers into each end of the tube and pulls. The more the child struggles, the tighter his fingers are trapped by the contracting openings. The human eye operates on the same principle. The more light there is available, the smaller the pupil becomes. As Oliver Wendell Holmes once said, the mind of a bigot is like the pupil of an eye. The more light you shine on it, the more it contracts. Human beings have a natural tendency to defend themselves from attack, be it physical or intellectual. Even if one's opinions are clearly based on misunderstanding or ignorance, one has a propensity to defend those ideas against all efforts of dissuasion. Psychologists use the term cognitive dissonance to describe a person's reaction when presented with information that contradicts his viewpoint. A common response to this dissonance is rationalizing, trying to reinforce one's behavior through murky and often faulty logic. Oh my goodness. What? A bigot harbors prejudices that seem hypocritical and inconsistent, but when another person endeavors to instruct him, he refuses to be moved to any other avenue of thought. He rationalizes, hanging on tightly to his opinions. The more light of knowledge is poured in, the tighter he holds to his preconceived bias. In Nathaniel Hawthorne's classic novel, The Scarlet Letter, the hypocritical townspeople look down upon Hester Prynne for her past transgressions, her adultery. Eventually, however, the influences of her good works begin to be noticed and her abilities realized. Society in general becomes more accepting of Hester and her illegitimate daughter Pearl. In contrast, the prejudices of the more learned citizens are unwavering, firmly embedded in the strict principles of Puritanism. Of Hester's contemporaries, those who have more knowledge, more enlightenment, are those who keep the tightest hold of their prejudice. The more light of knowledge is poured in, the more their mind will contract. Inspector Javert, the cruel-hearted police official in Les Miserables, also illustrates this point. Javert spends many years hunting down Jean Valjean, who was once convicted for stealing a loaf of bread to feed his starving nephew, a crime for which he served 19 years in prison. Javert becomes consumed by his quest for Valjean. Even though Valjean becomes an honest man and, through his position as a mayor, helps countless victims of poverty, Javert cares for nothing but seeing Valjean serve another prison sentence. The more times he is confronted by Valjean's goodness, the more relentless he becomes. The more light he sees, the more Valjean's inherent generosity is illustrated. The more Javert struggles to reconcile his past beliefs with the present circumstances. This conflict causes his mind to contract all the more tightly. The deeper an opinion is held by an individual, the tighter he will grasp it. By rationalizing his viewpoint, by persuading himself that he is correct in his beliefs, he carves those opinions even more deeply in his mind. Just as the child struggling with his Chinese handcuffs will cause it to tighten on his fingers, the bigot struggling with the light of knowledge will have a contracting mind. But fortunately, this does not need to be the end of the story. Javert clung so tightly to his beliefs and remained so intent upon his search for Valjean that he came to feel suicide to be his only option. We, however, are not doomed forever to be prisoners of past belief. The child is able to extricate himself from his predicament by ceasing to struggle and doing that which seems paradoxical, that is, pushing in to release the tension rather than continuing to pull apart. We have the ability to step back and examine our beliefs, taking what appear to be conflicting ideas and reframing our perceptions, allowing new light to illuminate rather than narrow our viewpoint.
I can't really tell you what it was about my Grammy Knapp's toast that made it better than any in the known world. She used normal butter, store-bought bread, and a toaster from the Stone Ages. Yet there was just something about going over to Grammy's house at 7 o'clock every morning and knowing that Grammy's toast, that divine giver of life, would be waiting for me at Grammy's rickety table. I honestly believe that her toast was served with a heaping, steaming side order of love. I know, that sounds kind of corny, but that's the way she would have liked it. It's appropriate that my first story about Grammy Knapp is about food because, well, Grammy was food. 3 things dominated her life, and those were food, family, and God. But to her, those weren't separate. Oh no, they were one and the same. Every day from the time I was 6 weeks old, I'd go over to her house, and she'd take care of me while my parents were at work. She'd always apologize to my mother, saying she was so sorry the house was so dirty. She'd just rather be playing with me than cleaning. And that's how she thought. She was a perfect grandma, even though she was just my nanny. She had everything the all-star grandma would have. She was great at cooking, always laughing, comfy furniture, and a tape of every cartoon a kid could want to watch. She loved to take naps. She had the best blocks on the block. And we'll just say she was festively plump. It only took 3 of her dresses to make a rather respectable fort. Trust me, I know. Her joy surpassed any the world's ever seen, throughout everything. And Grammy would soon deal with everything, and a little bit more. When my parents hired 56-year-old Joyce Knapp to be my nanny, they knew her. They knew that she had suffered from breast cancer and could get sick often. They knew that. But I didn't learn that Grammy was in cancer remission, or at least what that meant, until I was about 12 years old. But still, it didn't really click with me. Grammy didn't look, act, sound, or feel sick to me. But just 2 years later, Grammy began to get sick. Again. The cancer had returned, only this time it had spread itself throughout her entire back. Grammy began to pale, and within 2 weeks, was confined to a wheelchair. And for the first time in my Grammy Knapp's life, she wanted to quit. not because of the way it made her look or the way it made her feel, but because it changed her. She couldn't stand looking at me and wanting to smile, but not being able to muster the strength. Seeing her eyes gaze at mine, blinking in slow motion, remains the most heart-wrenching experience in my life. Yet, Grammy took comfort. She took comfort in her love for God and his love for her. She took comfort in her love for me and my love for her. Her body may have melted away, but her spirit sent forth a radiance that will stay with me my entire life. When I finally received the call that my Grammy Knapp had been sent to the hospital, waiting on life support for the cancer to finally win, I realized what I'd taken for granted for so long. Grammy was my wholehearted confidant, my complete support, my guardian angel, my best friend. The last words she ever said to me, sitting in her sunken wheelchair, were, "Baby, you're going to make a fine man." And I know that to be true, because Grammy made me that way. Grammy's gone now, and that's good for her. No more pain, no more suffering. She can finally take comfort. And I can too, because I know every time I lay in bed, looking up, thinking of her, or every time I sit down at my table, eating my buttered toast, that Grammy's right there, sitting next to me, smiling, laughing that big belly laugh, saying, "Baby, I love you too."
Senator Joe Lieberman's childhood conversations with his father were typical of most father and son conversations. "This is America," his father used to say, "and in this country a smart young fellow like you can grow up and do just about anything." In retrospect, the senator himself comments, "My dad, no doubt, was thinking doctor, lawyer, teacher, scientist, or businessman. I was thinking second baseman, New York Yankees." In light of over 200 years of history, the question remains, what is it about the game of baseball that so captures the dreams of Americans? In other words, what makes baseball America's favorite pastime? First, in a passage from her semi-autobiographical children's story, In the Year of the Boar and Jackie Robinson, author Bette Lord explains, "In our national pastime, each player is a member of a team. But when he comes to bat, he stands alone. One man, many opportunities. For no matter how far behind, how late in the game, he, by himself, can make a difference. He can change what has been. He can make it a new ball game. In the life of our nation, each man is a citizen of the United States, but he has the right to pursue his own happiness. For no matter what his race, religion, or creed, be he pauper or president, he has the right to speak his mind, to live as he wishes within the law, to elect our officials, and to stand for office, to excel, to make a difference, to change what has been, to make a better America." Second, historian Jacques Barzun declares, "Whoever wants to know the heart and mind of America had better learn baseball." And indeed, many of the ideals that this country upholds, such as justice and dedication, are manifested in the game of baseball. For example, a Little League motto states quite simply, character, courage, loyalty. Furthermore, both America and baseball honor a sense of fair play, and in the event that this integrity is compromised, the party responsible faces overwhelming disapproval. For instance, in the controversy surrounding Commissioner of Baseball Bud Selig and Minnesota Twins owner Carl Pohlad over the termination of the Twins, George Vesey, a sports writer for the New York Times, wastes no words in savaging the actions of these men. And I quote, "Now we know why so many noses have been twitching ever since Bud Selig began agitating to whack the Minnesota Twins out of existence. There is indeed something rotten in the Midwest. Vessey's harsh criticism of the situation reflects America's insistence on fair play. The game of baseball, indeed the game of life itself, is an exercise in dealing with the unexpected. As writer Martin Quigley puts it, the story of the curveball is the story of the game itself. Some would say of life itself. And hasn't the whole existence of America been about dealing with the unexpected and rising to the occasion, playing the curveballs and changing what has been? These are the times that try men's souls. But those times can't be much different from the bottom of the ninth in Game 7 of the World Series. All of the hope, the fear, the tension, and the worry. Indeed, baseball is America's favorite pastime, now more than ever.
Whenever we have a question, our teacher always responds with, "And I have an answer." That infamous day that the headlines screamed of terror shattered more than our nation. It brought our mentality of knowing the answers, our reality of self-assurance and confidence to ruin. That day, our teacher told us that it was the most difficult thing any instructor could tell his or her students, that she didn't know what would happen, that for once she didn't hold the answers. We don't understand, and we don't like that. What we hate to admit to ourselves and to others is that we simply do not know. Carolyn Ahrens, in her Living the Questions, expresses this universal profanity. She writes, "And suddenly how little I understand about everything was vividly apparent to me. I was coming up with a mass of contradictions. Life is short. Don't waste a minute of it. Life is long. Don't rush it. Life is cruel. Watch your back. Life is beautiful. Open your heart." I kept looking for the cohesive overview, a way to organize each of my observations into a neat outline. But if one exists, I didn't find it. Life is messy. Life is mystery. This much I understand. That day I really realized that life can never be fully understood. And as irritating and frustrating that truth is, I recognize that ironically, life derives its beauty from that very same unknown, that very same mystery. I think I finally came to comprehend what Dickens meant by "it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, it was the season of light, it was the season of darkness." In tragedy, in desperation, we realize hope. Because of acts of hate, we see compassion and understanding. Through fear and terror arise courage, bravery. It is in doubt that our faith is strongest, at its greatest. With chaos, we find ourselves banded together in unity. In our weakness, we find strength. In the middle of our hurting, we find raining down on us peace beyond understanding. We cry, "God, please bless America." We realize that He has never left us. The day after the September 11th terrorist attacks, I went to wake up my little brother. And what I found when I pulled off his covers was a stuffed dinosaur screeching at me the most hideous and hilarious, I guess, roar. He fooled me, and unlike any other day, I didn't mind. I think I loved it. Later that night, a boy vampire with plastic fangs attacked me. I fell for it all. Any other day for him to have chosen his actions would have rendered the circumstance completely meaningless. And yet in the backdrop, in the aftermath of the day before, I saw the greatest contrast that in the worst of human nature, we can realize the goodness of humanity. We have seen deeper into ourselves than ever before. We have been blessed with a divine notion that leaves us with a more powerful, more lasting impression that will forever touch and move us from day after number one to month after to year. This is my revelation, that God works in mysterious ways, that all it takes to achieve sufficient, the never satisfactory comprehension is to view this present situation in a different light. If we were to understand anything about this life, this would be what little we should understand. Because of its mysteries, of it being the ultimate mystery, life is beautiful. And as C.S. Lewis explained, the best is perhaps what we understand the least.
met this really nice girl at a party a while back. We struck up a conversation, and after a few minutes it was apparent we were interested in getting to know each other better. I asked for her phone number so I could call her later, and she wrote it out on a napkin and gave it to me. And we nodded to each other and said our goodbyes before I left the party. I still have that number. It's probably sitting on my dresser at home. It's been almost a week and I still haven't called her. And it's not because I just haven't gotten around to it yet. No, it's simply because I'm afraid. I'm afraid to think of the things it would take to keep a relationship going. I'm afraid to put in the time and the effort for commitment. I've never been in a relationship before, and I could very well be missing out on a great opportunity here. But the truth is, I have missed out on some incredible opportunities in the past. I'm sure we all have. And believe it or not, our whole lives are centered around the things we don't do and the opportunities we don't take. Sometimes we don't take chances because we're unsure of the outcome. Last fall, I happened to attend the state fair, and one of the events they were holding was this pie eating contest. There were 3 guys competing. For the sake of clarity, we'll call them John, Paul, and Mark. John had this grand reputation as being the fastest pie eater in town, and Paul, knowing his reputation and not wanting to face total humiliation in front of a crowd of people he didn't even know, decided to drop out of the concert. Well, it turns out that John suffered severe stomach cramps about 2 minutes into the contest, forcing him to drop out as well, leaving only Mark, the slowest of the 3, to finish up. In retrospect, Paul could have easily won, but instead, he'd been driven by his own biased prospect to the future to force himself into submission. Not taking chances usually is the result of not being comfortable with our own limitations, and rather than attempt to break those limitations, we heed to them, leaving us to wonder what might have been. I think that not taking chances, however, can be best exemplified by my inability to get a date. Seriously, it's impossible. Okay. One time, in junior high, there was this girl who liked me. She told some of my friends one day, and they asked, oh, scratch that. They forced me to go and talk to her, scared out of my mind. And then when I finally saw her, and they left, I asked her, are they trying to pull something? And when she shook her head no in disbelief, I just turned around and left, completely ruining any chance I would ever have with this girl. Now, you'd think I would learn from this. No, it turns out that a few years later, another girl asked me to a school dance, and I turned her down because of, get this, commitment. Commitment. I mean, it's not like we were going to get married or anything. And every time I think about it, I would like to give it a second chance. But that's the exact impression not taking chances can leave us with, a longing to change the past, a constant string of what-ifs in a lifetime of terrible memories. Now, fortunately, pie contests and past crushes aren't exactly the most important events in life. However, the result of not taking some chances can have a lasting impression. Years ago, my grandfather had bladder cancer, and after the surgery day, the hospital allowed him visitors. My mother asked if I'd like to go and see him in the hospital, but I was afraid and, didn't really want to go at the time. And after all, I'd be able to see him after he got out, right? He died a few days later. The only thing I could think about at the time was what I would have given to go, just to kiss him and tell him that I loved him, if only for one last time. But I chose to pass up my opportunity, and it, like so many other experiences, fills me with regret. Now, many instances may not make as lasting an impression, but it just goes to show what happens when you find yourself in a situation where you're unsure of the result and fearing the outcome. I say, do not let opportunities pass us by. We must try to eat faster than that reigning champion, show how much we care about people now, not later, and call all those girls who leave their numbers on napkins, no matter how much we might fear relationships. Still have that number. My opportunity is still knocking. Will I have the courage to open that door?
Sometimes I pause to look in the mirror and feel as if I'm looking at the reflection of oil on water. Rarely can I actually find my own features in the swirling colors. More often it's passing shadows and brief shapes that seem to define my image. And the longer I stand in front of that particular storefront window or bathroom vanity, the more feverishly the oil seems to dance on the water. Who am I? The question seems all but lost in those rainbows. Winston Churchill once said that to improve is to change. To be perfect is to change often. In that case, I must be rather immortal. It seems to me that as teenagers, my peers and I are constantly adapting and changing ourselves. We're faced nearly every day with new opportunities to either succeed or fail, delight or disappoint,
surrender or overcome. And the mirrors in which the pigtailed girl once saw simply her own smiling face now point out her glaring flaws and her moments of radiant